Cyberpunk 2077 had one of the greatest redemption stories in all of gaming, from launching in disaster to the long road to redemption, to it now being considered one of the best video games of all time, following the release of the 2.0 update and the Phantom Liberty expansion. Cyberpunk 2077's launch saga is a cautionary tale of biting off more than you can chew and taking responsibility for your own actions. Following the announcement of a sequel codenamed Project Orion, there is a mix of cautious optimism and skepticism that is lingering. While some Cyberpunk fans are looking forward to what's coming next, others who still feel completely burned by the launch are remaining hesitant, and with even some longtime supporters of CD Projekt Red expressing doubts, with even some vowing to never support the developer again. Today we're going to dive into the world of Night City and explore everything we know about Cyberpunk 2077's upcoming sequel, and discuss what CDPR needs to do to rebuild trust and restore faith among their player base. With the development underway by CDPR Boston, the big question I'll be exploring is whether or not the team can accomplish the seemingly impossible task of capturing lightning in a bottle with Cyberpunk's Project Orion. So a couple years ago, Cyberpunk's Project Orion was announced by CD Projekt Red during their strategic update on October 4th. So Orion was included in the lineup of future projects and current projects that CDPR is currently developing. It also included the new Witcher series and a new IP that all happened during that strategic update. It was kind of a crazy time. It was like, by the way, we have a new IP. We've got a new Witcher saga coming out. There's also a remake in the works. Oh, also here is the sequel to Cyberpunk as well. Let's just say your boy was having a good day that day. Now, CDPR confirmed that the sequel to Cyberpunk 2077, codenamed Project Orion, was in development, and the studio described it as the game that would prove the full power and potential of the Cyberpunk universe. It was revealed that the development of Project Orion would be handled by a new team under the CD Projekt Red North American team, which is based out of the company's existing Vancouver and Boston studios. CDPR also said that the development would require a significant expansion of its teams in North America. In their press release, they had this to say: CD Projekt Red has announced several high-profile additions to the team working on Project Orion, the anticipated follow-up to Cyberpunk 2077 being headed up by the US and Canada-based studios. They continued on by saying that Project Orion is currently in the early stages of development, at least as of this press release. We actually have some news to talk about pretty soon. And then they said, with studio veterans previously involved in Cyberpunk 2077, as well as the spy thriller expansion Phantom Liberty, that are spearheading the project, including Gabriel Amatangelo, I believe that's how you pronounce it, who's actually going to be the game director on this project. There's also the legendary Pavel Sasko, the associate game director, and there's even more that are a part of the larger team based in the newly created CDPR Boston. The press release also announced that Dan Hernberg is joining as the executive producer, who previously worked on games like Diablo 3 and New Worlds. There's Ryan Bernard of Massive Entertainment, Alan Villani, who worked on various WB projects as well. The initial reveal of a sequel in development was a bit shocking, like I said, especially since it came out before Phantom Liberty and the 2.0 update released, which created some cause for concern. But with the studio developing it being from Boston instead of back in Poland, it makes sense why they announced it for hiring purposes. This brings us to a few months back when we got our first real development update from CD Projekt Red. When Project Orion was initially revealed, the game was in the research and development phase, but as of August 2024, we got confirmation that that R&D phase would be concluding very soon, with the pre-production phase set to start near the end of the year. And during a recent Q&A with investors, the CFO of CDPR had this to say, and I quote, "As I mentioned with Project Orion, we are close to moving from the research phase to the development phase, so this part of the expenditures that was so far booked in our P&L will soon become treated as development expenses and presented as capitalized in our balance sheet." The Q&A also had some interesting information from the joint CEO of CDPR, who says they plan on doubling the amount of developers across the next year. The question was posed, when should we expect your development team to start growing more visibly? To which the CEO responded, "So in general terms, the biggest part of the team is working on Polaris right now, aka the new Witcher saga, and in this respect we feel that that team is kind of complete. Probably it will grow a bit, but we believe we have the force and all of the people that are required, at least in this part of our activity." They continued on saying, "At the same time, Sirius and Orion, probably with Orion presented on one of these slides right now, is around 60 people, and we believe over the course of the next year it should probably double the headcount. So it certainly seems that the next 7 to 8 months, the development for Project Orion is about to get real. The pre-production phase will last quite a bit, especially considering the studio is moving to Unreal Engine 5 for their games. So all of the systems that they build with Red Engine and the game world will have to be rebuilt, but I'll discuss the engine and the world in just a bit. When it comes to the gameplay, Cyberpunk Project Orion promises to deepen the overall player experience that we got from the first game. The developers said that they will take the Cyberpunk franchise further and continue harnessing the potential of this dark universe. But with that being said, we can expect the devs to introduce refined AI systems that will make the enemies and NPCs respond more dynamically to the player. I'm sure they're going to learn a lot of stuff whenever it comes to them developing the new Witcher saga, so I'm sure most of those systems they'll be able to utilize or at least adjust for the upcoming game. When I think of Unreal Engine 5, I immediately think of that Matrix demo that it had, and then once I actually jumped on the Matrix demo, I'm like, dude, imagine this being Cyberpunk. Now, along with the NPCs and just the dynamic AI systems that they're going to build, along with that, Project Orion will likely improve on the overall immersion with the new and enhanced cyberware, new weapons, vehicles, technology, skill trees, gear, and pretty much everything new for this new reactive world. But how is it going to feel? Like, what's the vibe going to be? Well, according to the developers, we actually have a bit of information about that. In a recent episode of the Answered podcast, the developers revealed that Project Orion would embrace a more distinctly American atmosphere, which will ground the game in the cultural nuances of America that will enhance the game's realism. The executive producer said this, and I quote, "I think Cyberpunk is obviously a uniquely American story. It's got a lot of punk energy, and the tabletop game was written by an American. So it just seems right to do it in America." Now, the associate game director was also on the podcast, and he brought up the manhole debacle, saying that he saw the post from a user that said that there was an immersion breaking bug in Cyberpunk, and that bug was the fact that the manhole covers for a sewer were the manholes that you normally would use in Europe or Germany for pavement. Pavel saying, "Those are not manholes that you would normally cover in America on the streets. Whenever you go to America, there's things like fire hydrants, where they're placed, how they look, the street lights, the positions of them, the trash bins, they're in front of the house, they're right by the street. In Poland, you just don't see it almost anywhere." Dan Hernberg then said that our curbs are different, our color is different on all of our signs. Everything is just slightly different. It doesn't break immersion, but it's just that little thing where you're like, well, maybe this wasn't made by people who live here or people who fully understand the American culture. They then said that I also think with the studio being in America, it allows for us to have those cultural touch points with the larger American, you know, kind of influence with Hollywood. Obviously, Cyberpunk 2077 took place in LA, and so there's just kind of all of these touch points and things where we can kind of interact with, whether that's from music or story or just different parts of America that are interesting to explore, end quote. So now with that being said, I am a bit concerned about the move to a more American flair. I actually appreciated how unique and almost foreign Night City felt, which this is kind of the perfect transition to the open world for Project Orion. The big question is will Night City return for Project Orion? Now, CDPR has hinted that Cyberpunk's dark universe will expand, but the team hasn't said whether or not Orion will revisit Night City or explore new locations. Given how iconic Night City is and the extensive lore in the Cyberpunk universe, a return there is the most likely scenario, but I just don't know if they're going to do it. Like, Night City will have to be rebuilt from the ground up and be even more expansive and detailed for the next game if they plan on utilizing Night City again, but this time it will have that more authentic American flair. But I don't know, like, you have the sequel situation where there's some games where they just do the same game on the same map, and it's kind of the situation like Spider-Man 1 to Spider-Man 2, where it's like, yeah, you added new locations, but it still very much is New York City. Now, they are going to have to build the game from the ground up, and Night City will have to be rebuilt, but it's like, if they expand things, then it's still just going to be Night City, but updated. And that might be a disaster for some players. Like, some people don't want to play on the same map every time. It's one of the reasons why GTA also switches cities every time, because like, if you add Los Santos as the map for 3 games in a row, then you're going to lose some of that flair. Now, one thing that I do want for the new map or Night City revamped is to use more of the verticality in the next game. There's these massive structures, these mega structures, but for most of the moving around the map, you're kind of just staying on the ground level. Now, with Cyberpunk 2077 being developed on the Red Engine, one of the limitations of the open world was from the engine level. While Red Engine did have its strengths, particularly with rendering atmospheric environments, it definitely struggled to handle large-scale open worlds with densely populated areas, which, as we learned from the launch, led to performance issues, bugs, and basically made everyone lower their graphics settings for the game to run, and even then, that wasn't enough. The move to Unreal Engine 5 will bring a lot of advancements that can improve aspects significantly. For instance, UE5's nanite technology is legit magic. It allows for highly detailed assets without the cost of performance performance, which will make it possible for Night City to be populated with even more buildings, objects, and textures. There's also Unreal's Lumen, which introduced real-time global illumination and reflections that enhances the overall lighting of the game, from the day and night cycle to the weather cycle, that helps create a more immersive world. That's not to mention the AI processing and streaming for the game world and environment, which essentially means that we'll see a seamless transition to densely populated areas without the impact to performance. Now, the next gameplay component of Project Orion that might happen is the introduction of multiplayer to the sequel. For those of you that might not know, Cyberpunk 2077 was initially supposed to have a multiplayer component, but it was inevitably scrapped prior to launch to focus on stabilizing its single player aspects. I would imagine that CDPR is certainly considering a multiplayer component to Project Orion. While obviously we won't have any specifics, but CDPR execs have hinted at a possibility of various multiplayer modes and even drawing some inspiration from the success of games like GTA Online. One thing is for sure though, it won't be at the launch of the game. If they do anything multiplayer, it will likely be a post-launch update, but even then that's going to be a pretty risky move to do anything online. I personally rejected everything live service as of lately, as I've stuck to mainly single player games. If CDPR does a multiplayer component, they have to keep it co-op only. Like, I can already see the headlines. If they release anything that resembles live service, it's about to be a nightmare. Now, recently there was a multiplayer mod that gained a ton of traction in the community, so maybe the success of that mod will influence the decision of the developers, but only time will tell. When it comes to the story for Cyberpunk's upcoming Project Orion, CDPR is aiming to create a more dynamic and complex story, which, if Phantom Liberty is any indication, which I really think it is, they're gonna draw inspiration on the success of that game. Yes, I'm saying a game, it's an expansion, but let's be honest guys, it's a full freaking game. The devs have said that they want Project Orion to have a similar branching paths and high-stake decisions seen in Phantom Liberty, so that the players feel immersed in the world and connected to the outcomes of their decisions. The emphasis on emotional depth and the complexity could lead to an interesting approach to cybernetics and the impact that they have on the human psyche. I also think the next game is going to be heavily centered around AI again. We've already seen Cyberpunk 2077 delve into those themes with Johnny Silverhand, Delamain, and more. For the sequel, I think a major plot involving rogue AIs breaching the Black Wall and then forcing humanity to decide whether to go against them or ally with them would be pretty interesting. Now, one thing that we do have to consider is the actual codename for this game. Well, if you didn't know, Orion is actually a corporation from the USA in the game lore. Orion specializes in special op missions and search and rescue situations in the Cyberpunk RPG, so perhaps the codename is actually a teaser for what we can expect with the game story. If we turn to the Cyberpunk wiki, like as you can see right here, the history, it says shortly after Orion Hunter's retirement, MANF corporate director Howard Merrill was trapped in his home by a group of infamous Iron Sight street gang. Assembling a dedicated team of experienced solos, Hunter swiftly accomplished the rescue mission with minimal loss of life. That team has become the core group that has evolved into Orion's elite cadre of experts, a team that we could put to work for clients. So Orion primarily focuses on hostage releases and corporate extractions, so perhaps that's what this story is going to involve. Maybe that there's like a corporate head that's stuck somewhere or is being held hostage, and that might be a big decision we have to make: join Orion and help them extract somebody, or turn on them and get that sweet bag from the enemy faction. Now, continuing on the topic of this story, another question that we have to ask is whether or not V will be the protagonist of Project Orion. Now, in some ways I want V to return, but the beauty of having a creative character in an RPG is moving away from that character won't hit as bad as them moving away from an iconic character like Geralt of Rivia. Yeah, I'm still a bit nervous about that whole situation, but that's why I think that the setting will be sometime in the future and tell a brand new story with an all-new protagonist. Now, the release of the sequel for Cyberpunk 2077 is still a long ways away, as it is still currently in the early development stages at CDPR. After they finished the development on Phantom Liberty, the team at CDPR Boston is now focused on developing the sequel, and now that they're about to wrap up the research and development phase and start the pre-production phase, we should get a better idea of when this thing is going to release. But I would just say it straight up right now, I wouldn't expect to have Orion for quite a while, likely not until the latter half of the decade, sometime around 2028, maybe even 2030. If it follows a similar timeline of Cyberpunk 2077, we'll be waiting a decade, but CDPR said that they're hoping to release games a lot quicker, which is why the development is being led by CDPR Boston in Vancouver and not the one in Poland. Now, one thing that I think is worth mentioning is that Project Orion will be developed on the Unreal Engine 5, like I said, and this means that the process of hiring developers and contractors will go relatively smooth. Compared to them developing on the Red Engine, it should be a night and day difference finding talent, which will definitely speed up the development process. CDPR Projekt Red was considered one of the best developers in the industry prior to the release of Cyberpunk 2077. They did amazing work on my favorite video game of all time, The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt, but after the launch disaster of Cyberpunk 2077, the faith has been lost by quite a number of players. So one challenge that CDPR faces with Project Orion is trying to restore that faith. In a recent interview published by Eurogamer, the joint CEO admitted that despite the team turning things around for Cyberpunk 2077, the studio may never recover the once good reputation that they had. He said at the level of the board, it was one, the realization of what happened, and two, we self-acknowledge that what has happened was a big challenge and big hit for the company, but a problem for the future we were hoping to build for this company for its perception amongst fans. And that's something, to be honest, that we've probably lost forever. Yes, you can repair some things, but it's a certain perception of the company that's never going to come back. CDPR's associate director working on Project Orion also commented and said this: I accept and understand that it might be a situation that never happens for some of them, but unfortunately it's a price we have to pay for what happened. But I hope throughout the work that we are doing, throughout all of the things that we're showing, we can actually win some of those people around, and when they hear someone talking about them, about incredible experiences that they can have in Phantom Liberty or the next Cyberpunk, the moment when they see that there's incredible value in that game, they will actually reach out for it and play it and enjoy it, which honestly I think we've already seen them work towards fixing their reputation. They delivered an incredible experience with Phantom Liberty, and if they can stick the landing with the new Witcher saga and Cyberpunk Orion, it will have been a long enough memory that the launch date of Cyberpunk 2077 will be a distant memory. A valuable lesson learned rather than a lasting stain on CD Projekt Red's legacy. But for now, we just have to let CDPR cook. Well guys, that's gonna wrap it up with this video. If you enjoyed it, do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel with your notifications turned on so you're not missing out on any future videos. And until next time, this has been Wes, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.